Hi and welcome back to the channel. This is Discover Newport. My name's Kevin and I'm a white badge guide for the city of Newport. And today I'm down at Gold Cliff because what I want to do today is a first video of two where I'm going to be looking at the history of Newport from the Stone Age to the modern age. And it all begins here down at Gold Cliff 40,000 years ago. So I'm hoping we're not going to get too much wind noise and not too much wave noise, but it is a great place to be. I'm on the seawall which runs along the south coast of Newport. This video is going to take us from Stone Age up to the start of the Civil War in the 1600s. So back in 1986 there was quite a large storm and it was discovered in the mud some footprints that had been uncovered. Different layers had been washed off during the storm, and when they were studied they used little bits of peat that was found in the footprints to date the footsteps, and those dated to about 6,000 years ago. Now, examining the footsteps, they think they belonged to about 4 young teenagers, and a large scale sort of studies have taken place since then, and now over 200 footsteps have been found. They've also found lots of Stone Age artifacts, some dating back as old as 40,000 years, but the footsteps themselves date back to about 5,000-6,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more. Now the new ones that they've also discovered during the studies since then included mainly children, and some as young as 3 or 4 year olds, so toddlers really, have been toddling around this area during Stone Age Britain, and that would indicate that maybe there was a settlement here in Gold Cliff during the middle to later Stone Age of around 6,000 years ago. Now those for a while were the oldest footprints ever found in Britain. Then in I think it was 2013, new footprints were found that were over 100,000 years ago down in Dorset. But for 30 years the footprints here in the mud in Gold Cliff were the oldest known in the UK. Now of course the environment was very different then during the Stone Age, especially the early Stone Age, where the tools were found from 40,000 years ago. Still coming out of the Ice Age. The sea levels here were much lower than they are today, and so those children would not have been playing on tidal mud flats. They would have been sort of clay marsh area, so not as dangerous as they are today. But the clay held the footprints really well, and that really is probably the first sort of indication of life and habitation in Newport. Family life definitely dates back about 5,000-6,000 years to our knowledge, probably before that, if you look at the 40,000 year old artifacts also found. So after the Stone Age we move into Bronze Age, and again down this area, down at Gold Cliff stroke Nash, there's evidence to suggest a Bronze Age settlement. A few years ago there was some sewn planks discovered. Now these made up a sewn plank boat, unique to the UK we believe. They tended to be found around estuaries. There's been 10 remains found in the UK, 3 in this area. There was the one found at Gold Cliff here, and 2 were found at Mega just down the road. So this part of the Welsh coast was obviously a busy location with sewn plank boats for that many to have survived. So what was a sewn plank boat? Well, these were exactly what they were called. They were carved planks, mainly of oak, that was stitched together with yew branches, and we think they may have been covered in a wax to make them watertight. They would have been tied onto a frame, and they were much more stable for coastal trips and estuary trips than a dugout log boat. So they could be quite large. The one found in Dorset believed to have a crew of 16 rowers and could have a cargo space of up to 3 tons. Now you can imagine here at Goldcliff, where you look across the bay and you see the North Somerset coast of Bristol and Minehead, Weston, and you lived on this side of the estuary, you'd probably look across there and think, is there anybody I could trade with? So it's quite probable that these boats were used for trading with the North Somerset coast. Humans or explorers, traders, and quite likely that they would venture out over the estuary at high tide to reach the other side. Now the planks that were found here at Goldcliff had been repurposed and were being used as a walkway across marshy ground. Now at that time they would not waste valuable resources like logs and wood on somewhere that was not frequented or important to them. So it could possibly be that there was a settlement there and that these log planks were being used as some sort of walkway down to the river's edge where they could get to the boat and a little bit of a dockside. So Bronze Age Newport was concentrated down here at the Goldcliff and Nash coast. So we now move from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. Now at that time this part of Wales and Newport was part of the Celtic Silures tribal and kingdom, and we do know of Iron Age settlements down at Redwick, but the Silures were a nomadic people. Their kingdom was not a great one, didn't have many resources, lots of marsh area, mainly pastoral, not very great for agriculture. So the Silures tended to be nomadic, have temporary structures, and they used to move their livestock around. So we won't find many permanent structures from the Iron Age in our area. But as we say, there's one found at Redwick. Ptolemy, the Roman historian, did write about the Silures. He wrote that they were of Spanish origin, looked very Spanish-like with their wavy dark hair, and had the Spanish demeanour, as in being pretty hot-headed and warlike. So he wrote that Buriam was their main capital for the region, for the kingdom, and that Buriam is actually now Usk. So Usk was the capital of South East Wales under the Silures. Their main fortification was at Clemartin Wood Hill Fort. That's just to the east of Caerleon and just to the north of Carwent. Massive hill fort there, and that was their main fortification from where they ruled militarily across the region. So as I was saying, at the time the Silures didn't have many resources. It was mainly a pastoral nomadic lifestyle, but they were also warriors, and it didn't go amiss that they would often and regularly raid neighbouring kingdoms, taking away their cattle and crops and whatever else they took a fancy to. So it was pretty much a lawless type of place, very much one of a harsh life full of Silures, but one that did well for the coming Roman times. So in AD 43, Rome decided to invade Britain. Now, Rome had already made a few incursions under Julius Caesar into Britain, and they'd traded very well with British tribes for 100 years before the invasion. Most of the South England was friendly towards the Romans until Caracas took over Britain. He was a king, powerful king, very antagonistic towards Rome, and he had a very powerful army with him, and that led to eventually a clash. As Caracas expanded his kingdom into South Britain, across into Wales a little bit, the trade and the friendly relations with Rome started to break down. So in AD 43, it was decided that Britain needed to be invaded and brought under Roman rule. So 3 legions came into Britain, attacked Britain. King Caracas stood his ground for as long as he could, but of course overwhelming forces meant he was defeated, and he headed off to southeast Wales, to the Silures, and to, we think, to the hill fort at Clonmartin Hill, to regain his forces. And from there he led a 10-year guerrilla campaign against the Romans. Obviously Roman superiority eventually started to eat into Wales, and Caracas headed to Snowdon to continue his guerrilla campaign. The Queen at the time of Snowdon region saw which way the wind was blowing, and rather than giving him sanctuary from which he could continue his fight, she captured him and handed him over to the Romans, who sentenced him to death. So King Caracas had, as a powerful king, despite being sentenced to death, had the right to speak and plead his case to the emperor. So he was taken to Emperor Claudius, where he gave an impassioned speech, which is noted in various artworks of the time, and his death sentence was removed, and he spent his life as a prisoner of Rome, although a prisoner as a king was not too bad at all. So as Caracas' campaign of guerrilla warfare ended at the Silures, the Romans moved in, and the Silures actually became quite friendly with the Romans, and in AD 76, after about 30-year fight, and Wales were brought under control, a legionary fortress was established at Caerleon. Now the reason why it took so long to bring the Wales under control was, as part of the campaign against Anglesey in AD 60, 20 years after the invasion, and about 10 years before the final subjugation of Wales, Boadicea led her revolt, and that led to the legionaries of Wales being sent down south to confront Boadicea and to defeat her, and that held up the invasion for a few years. But finally Wales did succumb, and the Caerleon legionary fortress was established in AD 76. Now this legionary fortress brought a substantial amount of wealth into the Newport region, into the Silures region. Roman soldiers and their mercenaries were paid very well. Not only did they receive their salary, every time they won a battle they were paid bonuses. On feast days of the Roman gods they received bonuses. Not only were the Romans the fighters, they were also the builders of the Roman Empire, and about a third of their time was spent building the infrastructure of Rome. And every time they built a house of a trader they would receive a bonus. Every time they built shops they would receive a bonus. Every time they connected up the cities and the trading areas with roads they will receive a bonus. So very well paid, substantial amount of money coming into the area through Caerleon, and Caerleon became a very wealthy area, and the Carwent was established as a civic centre for the region, for Wales, and a substantial marketplace and trading centre established there, as well as a substantial trading centre and entertainment centre built around Caerleon, bringing in a lot of wealth and a lot of people. So Caerleon was a major legionary fortress for about 200 years. Now, legion would consist of about 5,000 fighting men, and in addition to that you would have substantial amount of support staff. But in about 200 AD, Rome changed its military strategy. It moved away from large-scale, large armies and legions to subjugate and invade territories, and became much more of a policing operation. So much of the area had fallen to Rome, very friendly. Really the only issues that Rome had until it started to fall was one of policing and dealing with bandits and the like. So these large legions were split up into smaller 200-man units and sent out to live in small forts and small garrisons spread across the Roman Empire. And Carleon was pretty much left to the local natives to continue as the forces moved out. So at about 400 AD, Rome fell, and the soldiers left and returned, those who wanted to, but a substantial number of soldiers remained as natives. They'd become established within the local communities. When a Roman soldier retired, he served 25 years and he would receive 13 years worth of salary as a pension. Substantial amount of money, allowing them to buy property. Many would have left Rome and the Roman Empire as a young man, 15, 16 years old. Because of the distances involved, they would sign up for 25 years and they would often stay for 25 years in the location they got posted to. So they would find love, start families. Many would bring their own families from Rome to join them. So although Rome fell and the Roman influence ended at about 400, they've still had a big impact on the local regions. But we were now moving into the Dark Ages. Very little recorded, very little left of the from the fall of the Roman Empire to the invasion of the Normans. That period called Dark Ages or Early Middle Ages. Very little. It was mainly from legends and the Welsh bards and the Welsh sagas and the Welsh triads that we know a little bit about what happened, but very little accurate recorded history, but very interesting history for Newport, because this is when Newport got established during the Dark Ages. So despite the Romans having been left, Carleon still remained a very wealthy and very powerful area, and it was here in the Dark Ages that King Arthur was crowned. King Arthur was heir to Arthur of Pendragon's kingdom, the Britain kingdom, currently under attack by the Saxons. The Saxons had taken over much of Western England. They had come from and invaded from Denmark and Netherlands and Germans, and the Saxons were being well established and pushing back against the Britons, who had been relegated to Wales and northern parts of England and Scotland. So King Arthur was viewed to be the saviour of the Britons. He was crowned as a 15-year-old boy at Carleon, believed to be crowned within the amphitheatre because it's a perfect place for a coronation. The river Usk was packed full of royal boats that had come from parts of Britain and also from the continent to watch the crowning of the saviour of the Britons, King Arthur. Pageantry galore, and even during the coronation, the Saxons made a raid, or were said to have made a raid of Carleon, and as he was being crowned, he gathered his knights and went off, dealt with the intrusion of those pesky Saxons, and went back to being crowned during his coronation. During his early years, his round table met, it is said, in the Roman Great Hall, which was still standing at the time. It's not standing anymore. Some say the amphitheatre was where he met his knights, and it was a round meeting rather than a round table, which became a round table. But most of them will say that the round table itself was held in the Great Hall, where he met his knights. There is some dispute over whether he held his court in Caerleon before he moved to Camelot, as said in the legends. Some say that he held his major court, and his major fortification was at Clanmelin Wood Hill Fort, because it was an easier place to defend. But either way, this was the area that King Arthur was coronated in, and where he mounted his campaigns against the Saxons to regain England for the Britons. So it was also at this time that Newport was established. The father of Newport was a king called King Grenchlu. He was a pirate king, he was a rustler. His empire, or his kingdom, was based in what we now call Penguinley in Newport, and from the River Usk at Penguinley he sailed his pirate ships to terrorise the Bristol Channel. He also raided regularly local kingdoms for food, for cattle, and for various other items. But he was also a compatriot and an ally of King Arthur, but two very different characters. One of the things that King Grenchlu did was he fell in love with Princess Gladys, who was the daughter of the King of Breiniog, or what we now call Breconshire. But when he asked for the hand in marriage, he was denied, and this upset him. It also has to be said that Princess Gladys also replicated that love. She was very much besotted by the pirate king known as Grenchlu le Beaded, but she was denied her betrothal by her father. But this did not impress King Grenchlu at all. So rather than accept the fact that he wasn't going to be with his love of his life, King Grenchlu decided to take her by force. So he gathered his army, he got in contact with King Arthur, who agreed to meet him, and it was hoped that with the combined forces of King Arthur, his knights, their soldiers, and Grenchlu's army of 300, that the King of Breiniog would agree to release his daughter for marriage. Didn't quite work out that way though, because when King Grenchlu arrived with his 300 men and there was no sign of Arthur, who had been delayed, he decided to attack the kingdom of Breiniog himself, and it was slaughter. Very nearly lost the day. Of his 300 soldiers, 200 lay dead, and it was then by pure fortune that two of King Arthur's knights with their soldiers, accompanying army, came upon the scene. They were the advanced party, set to prepare the way. They saw the battle, entered the battle, and the tide began to turn in Grenchlu's favour. And when the main army of King Arthur arrived, he was able to enter the castle, or the fort, of Breiniog and take his betrothed for marriage. But Grenchlu did lose a substantial part of his army that day as he fought for the hand of the daughter. So Gladys and Grenchlu got married, and they had their firstborn son, and they named him Cadoc. Now, to celebrate Cadoc's birth, Grenchlu did what he normally would do. He went out, raided a farm, and rustled some cattle to have a feast and celebrate. But on the way back, he met the Bishop of Caerleon, who gave him a bit of a scolding and told him to take the cattle back. He didn't, but he was so impressed with the Bishop's stance that he promised the Bishop that when Cadoc was old enough, he would go to Caerleon and study under him the religious ways. And that's what Cadoc did. He became a very major saint for South Wales. You'll see references to St Cadoc all over South Wales, down into Cornwall, across Brittany. But not only did he learn the ways of Christ under the bishop, he evidently became a knight, and a knight of the Round Table at the same time, because St Cadoc was one of 3 knights that King Arthur entrusted to guard the Holy Grail once it was found. So Cadoc, when he came back from his studies and his knightly training, persuaded his father, Gwenclw, to give up his sinful life, which he did. And he had a vision of a bull with a black mark, and he said wherever he found that bull, Gwenclw would build a church for Christ, which he did do. He came across it, he went out, found the white bull with the black mark, built a hermitage at the top of Stow Hill, where St Woolas Cathedral now stands, and he and his wife Gladys then spent many years living in repentance. They would fast, they stayed on a vegetarian diet. Every day they would go swimming in the River Usk, down at the Usk at Stow Hill, and also every night they would go for 1 hour's walk naked. They lived the life of penitence up on Stow Hill. But eventually Cadoc persuaded his mother to leave his father. Obviously for some reason he wasn't very happy with his mother parading around naked every night, and she left him and set up her own hermitage and place of penitence down at Pencar, which is at Cohen Cano, and Gwenclw spent the rest of his life alone in a hermitage, living a life of a recluse and a religious figure. Okay, so we move on from the Dark Ages and the time of legends and stories and sagas, and more into a more historical time of the Normans. Norman invasion took place 1066. Took probably about 20 years for them to reach what we now know as Newport. And Newport went through a bit of an identity crisis because it was called 3 different things before we now know it as Newport or Cast Newit in Welsh. So let's have a look at what happened during the Norman period. Normans probably built their first castle at the top of Stow Hill by where the St Woolas Cathedral now is. There was a church there. Gwenclw's hermitage had become a bit of a shrine, and the church had been built and it was being expanded on, and a wooden castle was probably built close by at the top of Stow Hill, overlooking the River Usk and down the valley, where they had the height for benefit. But at some stage within a few years, they decided a much better location would have been down where we now see Newport Castle. And the first castles would have been wooden sort of fortresses, and then it was built in stone for major defence of that river crossing. It's also at that time, in the 1100s, early 1100s, when there's a written record of land being granted for the building of a bridge next to the castle. So the first bridges would have been made of wood and was built in the 1100s. Until then, we think there might have been some sort of fording point at that place, where it was shallow enough for people to walk or wade through at low tide to get across the river. But that's where the castle was built, and then the bridge. And the river wharves were first being built for trading, and this is where we start to get a little bit of a complex regarding the names. The original name was Castle Newid ar Wisk, which meant Newcastle on the Usk. That was then shortened by people to Cast Newid ar Wisk, and then shortened again to Cast Newid as we now know it in Welsh. Casnewid is Newcastle, not Newport as it is in Britain. So where did the word Newport or the name Newport come from? We think it was from those early sort of Norman traders and early medieval traders that was calling in at the new port, the new river wharves, as opposed to the Roman old port. So it was really a bit of a local lingo, as you say, old road and new road. The sailor was saying we'll stop at the new port rather than the old port, and Newport sort of took a hold and became the English version of the town's name. But that wasn't enough for Newport or Casnewid of Norman times. It was also called and marked down as on the maps as Novus Burgus or New Borough, but Newport and Casnewid were the ones that stuck. The Norman invasion also of course led to a change in the way that Wales was run. The kingdom of Gwenclwyd disappeared, all the minor kingdoms and tribal lands disappeared, and Wales, like the rest of England, was brought under the lordship system and the feudal system of the Normans. And this is where the Morgan family began. It is said that one of the local families, large families of the area, were very friendly towards the Normans, very helpful to the Normans as they made their way through Wales, and as a reward they were granted the lands of Monmouthshire, or what would become Monmouthshire, and that family was the ancestors of what we now know as the Morgan family. So really the Morgan influence on Newport began just after the Norman invasion. So we go through the Norman invasion, early Middle Ages, and now we're into the Middle Ages themselves, and this was a good time for Newport. This was a time of growth and a time of prosperity, and mainly from the 1206 I think it is, and the signing of the Magna Carta. Up until then the monarch, royalty, imposed taxes, but one of the important things about the Magna Carta was that taxes became payable upon consent. Now Wales had no representation in Parliament at that time, and so could not consent to being taxed. The royalty tended to spend their time in England. They had the Parliament or their council just down the road, very easy to get to raise taxes and to get consent, gave out a few honours, and they get the vote for taxation, or subsidies as it was called then. But to get the Welsh to pay taxes, the monarch would have to up his court, pack up all the tents, all the regalia of office, come into Wales, set up his court, call all of the landed gentry from Wales together and ask for their consent. A lot of hullabaloo to go through. So Wales was pretty much left untaxed, and this helped it grow in Newport on the river trade, because goods coming in to Newport and being unloaded at Newport was not subject to the same amount of duty, or any duty, or local taxation, or custom duties that ports in England were subject to. This made it a very profitable place to do business. You could say it was a free port of the medieval times. So without those taxes to pay, Newport grew, people came into the town, traders made a lot of money, there was pastures, farming was beginning to take off, good fishing. It was a good place to be and a good time to be in Newport if you was a trader. Now this advantage for tax purposes stayed in place in Newport or in Wales for about 300 years, and it wasn't until the Acts of Union in the 1500s that Wales and England had a similar financial system. Wales got representation in Parliament, and from about 1500 the tax advantages that Newport held over English ports disappeared, and it just became like any other normal port in the country. But for 300 years Newport thrived as a free port. During the time that the riverfront theatre was being built, they uncovered the remains of a medieval trading ship built in the 1400s, early 1400s. It's a major find. It's one of the oldest ships ever found, and it's thought to have done its trade between Newport and the Mediterranean. Probably Portugal, France, Spain sort of areas would have been the route it would have covered. Of course, this was before the discovery of the New World, so nothing from the India or the US would have been coming in at this time. It would have been mainly Mediterranean or European items, with a few luxury items coming along the Silk Road from China, if they made their way that far across to the UK or to Britain. But it was a major find. It's now been restored. Fantastic place to visit. It is of global significance, this boat is, and it's a real jewel for Newport to have. But that was found laid up in one of the river wharves during the building of the Riverfront Theatre. Well worth going to see. Lots of artefacts, some of it on display in the museum, so well worth a visit to find out about this important and significant maritime relic. So in 1314, Newport was growing at a pace and a busy sort of town and port, and it received its first town charter, and that town charter allowed it to elect a full-time representative to run the town, so like a town mayor or a town clerk who would deal with all the day-to-day running of a city or a town that was growing. It also allowed it to have a guild, which was like a union of tradespeople, so they could control the trade within the town. So that was its first charter that it received, and the beginning of the town that would grow to be the Newport that we know today. About 70 years later, in 1385, Newport received its second charter, and that charter allowed it to run a weekly market and also to run a once a year annual fair where people would come in from all over the region to sell their wares, be entertained, and to generally just have a good time. So an annual fair every year was permitted. Now that second charter was issued by the Earl of Stafford. Newport spent a lot of time under rule of Earl of Stafford, and you can see that today with the Newport coat of arms, very much based on the Earl of Stafford's coat of arms, except that on the Newport coat of arms the chevron points down, and on the Earl of Stafford's coat of arms the chevron points up. So very similar, and very much a throwback to the days when Newport was controlled from the Earl of Stafford's estate. The next major step of Newport is in 1402, during the last war of independence for Wales, where Owen Glendower attacked and took Newport Castle. He ransacked the town, burning it down, and it destroyed the church on Stow Hill, which was dedicated to now St Glenclue. It was a very popular church, very well respected. He was a great and very popular saint, and Owen Glendower did no favours when he destroyed that church, because of the local legends associated with bad luck to anybody who did anything wrong to that church. One of the legends has it that on a Viking raid, the Vikings walked off with relics from the church, and as soon as they entered the boat, their boat sank and was destroyed and all hands lost. And there's plenty of stories like that associated with the church of St Glenclue. So Owen Glendower was not a popular figure when he destroyed a very popular church. Eventually Owen Glendower was beaten back and defeated, and things returned back to normal, and Newport rebuilt itself and carried on growing based on those town wharves along the river, and having a free port or tax-free haven for traders to operate in. In 1426, Newport was given another charter, This time it allowed it to operate 2 town fairs each year, which showed just how popular the town was becoming. Even though it was still quite small, it was a major trading centre for the region, and it was rewarded as such. And then finally in 1623 it was given an updated royal charter to establish a number of rights for the town, and that was issued by James I. So we're now up to 1623. We're on the eve of the Civil War. Newport was about to join forces and side with the Royalists against Oliver Cromwell's Roundheads and parliamentarians. But that's all to come in the next video. So hopefully you've enjoyed this quick walkthrough of our first video on the history of Newport from Stone Age to modern day. And today's video has been about Stone Age up to the Civil War. And I've tried to pick out some great little stories to illustrate what a rich and diverse culture and heritage Newport has within its city boundaries. So until next time, thanks for watching. My name's Kevin. I'm a white badge tourist guide for the city of Newport here in South Wales. I'm just here out on the sea wall at Goldcliff. Now if you come down to the sea wall, you can drive down. There's a little bit of a parking area. It's a great walk on a sunny day. There is a cafe down here, but it is winter months now, and it only opens on Saturday and Sundays during the winter. But do come down, have a walk, enjoy light refreshments. It is just light refreshments and ice cream, and help a small local business to keep established here on the Gwent levels. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Cheerio.